You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Doug Norrie, the owner-operator, DFSR.com. If you need some projections for FanDuel and or DraftKings, head on over to DFSR.com. We got you covered there. Every single sport, right down to every single player. NBA, 240 minutes per team, baby. No Adam Armbrecht on the podcast again today. He's away through the end of the week. That's all right. We'll host some solo shows. Plenty to talk about in Nets Nation. Have to say also, thanks again for making Locked On Nets your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, streaming on YouTube as well. And handling all the YouTube duties this week too. So not all of them. Adam's still kind of in the shadows there, making sure the YouTube gets up. But make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. Sorry, Adam, if I took a little bit of a credit. You were still doing the Lord's work when it comes over to YouTube. Talked about the Knicks Nets game yesterday for a while. It was a really good one, like we said, in yesterday's podcast. Everything you wanted in a basketball game happened in that game in the Clays on Tuesday. Just one of those ones, trading baskets, superstars rising to the top to make sure the Nets get over the hump and are able to win the game. So it's hard to take a look at yesterday's game and have too many qualms. I mean, you probably wish you could have held the lead a little tighter, how you would have liked to have seen the Knicks stop themselves from storming back. Or you would have liked to see been able to stop the Knicks from storming back on multiple occasions when you thought the game was just kind of won. But all in all, it's a good win. But I think yesterday's game, again, still highlights some roster imperfections that they have. And one thing that we hadn't talked about, because the news came in at weird timing, it came in on Monday afternoon, and this was after Adam had recorded with the Locked On Knicks guys, so we got caught in between there. And then, obviously, wanted to talk about the Knicks-Nets game yesterday, because that was, first and foremost in terms of in Nets world, what you want to talk about. But we kind of did skip over the news that Joe Harris was going to miss the next 4 to 8 weeks with the ankle issue. If you remember, he went down a few games ago when he was under the basket. He was going for a rebound, and he came up hobbling. It was the OKC game. He came up hobbling right away, and it looked pretty bad. Like, he stayed on the ground for a little bit. It looked like he had twisted it. And then we commented on the podcast the next day, was that, or maybe even that night, where he gets up and he comes down the court for an offensive set, and he's so clearly hurt at this point. It's like unbelievable. And they don't call a timeout. Very oddly, he can barely move. And then they don't make the basket, and OKC comes back down the court, and he goes to a defensive possession. And then they finally get the ball back, and then they call the timeout. Now, I don't want to say I don't think it's that possession that did him more. Maybe it did him more damage. They haven't reported about that. I just was bringing it up because we did talk about it at the time, that it was so weird that he was sort of continuing to hobble up and down the court when he was clearly just kind of toughing his way through whatever had happened to the ankle. Now he needs a surgery. It doesn't sound like it's a major surgery, but Nash had come out in the pregame press on Monday, or excuse me, the practice press on Monday, saying that Harris needed to go through a procedure to clean up, because there was like bits of bone floating around. I'm not laughing. It's just like crazy to hear a bone issue with small, tiny bits of bone that were kind of in the ankle that needed to be corrected. And so that doesn't sound great. They also gave a timeline, like I said, of 4 to 8 weeks for him to return. And we do know with the Nets that their injury timelines can play a little fast and loose with the injury timelines. 4 to 8 weeks is a huge gap. It doesn't sound like that much when you put it that way. It's the difference of a whole month. So it is a huge gap. Sometimes you can phrase things in certain ways that don't make it sound that bad, but the difference between 4 to 8 weeks is literally double, right? It's like either 4 or double it, and it's 8. And we also know that at times the Nets, timelines around when guys are going to come back get a little fuzzy. They play things pretty close to the vest in terms of what, when a guy's going to come back. Sometimes we just don't know at all, whether it's injury or not. Went through this with, multiple times with Kyrie at this point. I'm not even including the current situation. This is, things had come up multiple times in his first 2 years with a team where the shoulder issue gets sort of pushed down the chain, and then he sits out the season. And then obviously last year when he took time off, and, we know Nick Claxton's been out with illness for a while, what seems like basically the entire season. Very little news has come out around what that is or what the timelines are. I'm only using these as examples to say that I want to trust what the team says. And I feel like, with surgery, timelines are usually pretty clear. This surgery and this recovery takes X amount of time. The Kyrie situation was different, obviously. The Claxton situation was an illness. They don't necessarily always have the same clear timelines around them because they're a little more sort of just like out there, sitting out there in the ether in terms of what's actually happening. But with the Harris thing, we now know that the team will be without him for at least a month, maybe 2 months. And that's hopefully if everything goes right in terms of his recovery, the surgery, and everything else that goes along with it. Now, whatever you think of Joe Harris, and I know he's a polarizing figure in the Nets community, you can't really look at it as anything else but a pretty bad loss for the team. Every team deals with injuries. I get it. I'm going to go through. It's been a big injury week here. Going to go through some of the other injuries that have come down the pike in the NBA this week. But there's no matter what you think of Joe Harris as a player, there's almost no way you can. And I'm talking even if you're at the left end of the bell curve, like you're the anti-Joe Harris crew, which definitely exists out there. I do not count myself in that crew at all. I know Adam doesn't either. But even if you are the full-on, we need this guy out of here crew, you still can't look at this situation as a positive. Like Luke going from Joe Harris's minutes to what the Nets have below him on the roster is still a downgrade almost every time. I say almost every time. There's going to be some situations where it's not, but for the most part, losing Joe Harris, especially for the way the Nets are constructed, makes them worse. And I don't think there's just almost no chance, no matter how you feel about this guy, that you don't see that to be the case. Like you have to be able to see that what Joe Harris brings to the team is pretty critical for how they've constructed the team. And I'll get to in a couple of minutes. I'll get into. We'll break down some of his numbers. We'll look at a little bit what's happening for him this season. It's not all great, so don't get me wrong. This isn't going to be a Joe Harris total gush fest. It really isn't. But it's just the acknowledgement that losing him for 2 months, maybe. By the way, I'm rounding up. You got to always round up with the Nets when it comes to injury. So I'm rounding up to 8 weeks, 2 months. That losing him for 2 months. And I'll be pleasantly surprised if it's different. That's how I'm going to operate in my own mindset here. But or if it's less. But losing him for 2 months is a blow to the team. And I think we can agree as people that are on maybe differing sides of the Joe Harris seesaw that I think we can meet in the middle and say that it definitely makes the team worse than better to not have him for the next 2 months. Going to get into some of his stats. Like I said, some of the good stuff, some of the not so good stuff on Joe Harris. What maybe where it will help the team, but where some of his deficiencies have been this season, where he was obviously really helping the team. First, cha-ching, baby. That is the sound that makes you smile, especially if you are a business owner and especially if you are making another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. If you didn't know this, so Shopify is a complete commerce platform, lets you start, grow, and manage a business from the ground up. It's subscription-based software. If you're running one of these things, it's absolutely critical to get those subs coming in and allows anyone, and I mean anyone, to set up an online store to sell your products. Shopify store owners can sell their products in physical locations using some drop shipping and Shopify POS. That's the point of sale app and accompanying hardware. It gives entrepreneurs the resources that used to be only for the big businesses out there. They used to kind of have all of that stuff at their fingertips, and the little guys, as you weren't able to get their hands on this kind of software. Shopify levels the playing field. Scaling your business is a journey, endless possibilities. Shopify helps you make your entrepreneurial dreams come true. Go to shopify.com/lockedonnba. Make sure it's all lowercase, locked on NBA, for a free 14-day trial. You get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/lockedonnba, all lowercase, right now. Shopify.com/lockedonnba. And do you know why free trials renew without your consent? We've all signed up for them. We've signed up for those free trials out there. The little allure of getting something for free, but you know those free trials don't stay free for long. It's a businesses out there to get you. Don't let those greedy corporations pocket your money. Download Truebill to take care of your subscriptions. Truebill is a new app, helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or just simply forgot about. We've all been there. I mean, I paid for satellite radio for an ungodly amount of time at one point before Truebill. And I want to say years. It's long since I had stopped using it. It can happen to you folks. And especially in this day of subs, you probably have a few floating out there. You need Truebill. On average, people save up to $720 a year with Truebill. Truebill is your concierge, is where you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions so you don't have to. Don't fall for subscription scams. Join the over 2 million users that Truebill has helped to save them over $100 million. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/lockedonnba. Go right now. Truebill.com/lockedonnba. It could save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/lockedonnba. All right, so what are they losing with Joe Harris so far this season? Look, I'll give what a lot of folks out there want to give the downsides of Joe Harris. This is what these people don't like about Joe Harris that I've kind of come to understand in Nets world. They don't love the playoff shooting. I get it. It didn't look great at the times where they needed it most last year, and that was a problem for a stretch of games, especially in the Milwaukee series, with some open shots. So that's one thing that kind of set some folks off on the Joe Harris, anti-Joe Harris piece. I think also with Joe Harris, the stat that I think bothers people, the fans, the most at this point, it does not bother me in the same way, but I think that it bothers other people, is actually just the money he makes. And I kind of get that too. When you make a certain amount of money, the expectation on you changes. We see this at really every stop along the way for players when it comes to progression along their own development timeline, is that when you don't make any money, it's in quotes, when you don't make any money, the expectations can stay lower and it can feel like whatever you get, especially if it's good, can feel all that much better. It flips when you get, take the bag in some cases. And now really the only thing that changed about Harris was the expectation. The expectation going from not that much money prior to this to around $18 million a year, with 17, then 18 next year, and then 19, almost 20 in the 23-24 season. When that expectation changes, like the stats are pretty much the same. It's just that the expectation around what he should be doing has changed because he gets paid. He eats up more of the salary cap now. And when you eat up more of the salary cap, you are going to, really everybody is going to want certain things from you. Now, it's probably there where he hasn't delivered on the lines that some folks thinks he has, or that he should. And I think that is actually sort of the crux of the issue when it comes to Joe Harris. For the most part, some of the stats, like I said, this season are not great. Sample sizes are still kind of small, but not crazy small for him. Some of the stuff didn't totally pass the eye test, the defensive stuff, especially guarding multiple positions, which you kind of need to be able to do when you play this sort of, I'll just call him a wing at this point. I guess some people would call him a small forward. Try not to get too granular along positional lines. But I always want to couch that by saying, do you not like Joe Harris, or do you not like that he makes $17 million a year and you think that $17 million could be spent elsewhere? Because I think that's sometimes the disconnect between in the conversational scape around what they dislike about his game or like about his game or whatever, is that the money piece seems to always comes up. For a guy making X, you should be able to do Y. right? That ends up becoming kind of the conversation around Joe Harris, because like statistically, for what they needed to at least get him to bring him back on paper, you bring him back as a shooter. That has not dropped off at all this season. When he got hurt, third in the league in 3-point field goal percentage, behind Jonas Valanciunas, number one, 52%. My goodness. Patty Mills is second at 47.8, and then Joe Harris is third at 46.6. So you're getting a guy who, for the most part, when he was getting his shots, was making them. So that's not really a problem, right? Like, you want him to make the shots that are available to him for them, not even for the most part. He just did it. He was right in line with the excellent shooting that he had last year. He shot 48% over the course of last season, 1.3 more attempts last year than this year. So maybe, excuse me, that was a field goal percentage. Never mind. He's taking the same amount of threes per game that he was last year. So he's shooting exactly the same. So it's hard to kind of like call that into question. But I think what the problems that people have with him are, one, on the defensive end, it probably wasn't happening as much. And some of those numbers really do kind of bear out in terms of the eye test piece about his defense not getting there, because there's a lot of stats that really aren't helping his case at all. And if you want to say you're making $18 million a year, you can't just be a 3-point shooter and nothing else. Like, you need to have your game progress a little bit. You need to be maybe a little more of a 3-level scorer, or at least 2-level scorer. You need to be able to contribute, at least be not a negative on the defensive end. I'm still probably not willing to put him totally in the negative. No one would probably call him more than an average defender, and I think that's probably pretty fair for Harris. Like, in certain matchups, we saw this with Middleton last year, certain matchups will kind of grind him up. And again, if you keep going back to the money, then that's where the problems are going to be sort of problematic. In terms of net rating for Harris this year, he ranks, I'm going to count him 9th, because among like sort of qualified guys with minutes, Kessler Edwards is really high up there. And I don't really think I can count him, so I'm going to knock him off, because he's technically 10th, but I'm going to knock Edwards out there because just the minutes aren't enough. So in terms of net rating, that's pretty low in the 10-man. If you're looking at a certain X amount of guy rotation, Harris's net rating is pretty low. If you want to look at like sort of on-off court, just like that kind of stuff, like on who he's been paired with, it hasn't always turned out great, even in pairings that maybe should pair up pretty well. Like, for instance, the Harden and Harris pairing, you think should kind of work, right? Like, that's a duo with a little bit of spacing. Harden, and maybe if you have another big, is going to help you. A big is going to help you get enough spacing for Harris to get some good open looks. That pairing has a negative net rating on the season over 260 minutes. Okay, I'm leaving out the other guys that were on the court with him, but that's a decent amount of minutes. Those guys are on the court. You think it would kind of work over the long term. It really hasn't. Some of that was on the defensive end. Then if you pair him up with Harden and 2 other shooters, like if you put Harden plus Mills and Harris, those numbers are bananas. Like 107 minutes with 121.74 offensive rating, which is like historic levels, right? So you get two sharp shooters that can space the floor, and then James Harden, and it kind of works. My point being is, there's ways that you can slice Harris's numbers here that are not really going to help him. So, and I get it. Like, if you're paying a guy this much, you need some of these other sort of like critical pieces to start lining up around his time on the court, and it just hasn't. If you go over to Raptor, which is 538's, basically wins over replacement level statistic, that the numbers are really pretty grisly over here. Negative on offense for Raptor, negative on defense, has a minus WAR, which means WAR wins above replacement. That's like saying that any average NBA player or replacement level player would have been better than Joe Harris. I find that to be a little hard to believe, but hey, if you're going to trust Raptor, like Raptor got Kevin Durant and James Harden, right? Those are the 2 best players in the team. Got Patty Mills, right? He's 3rd best. We know what he's been able to give to the team. If you're going to trust it on the good pieces, then if it was all wonky, where it was like DeAndre Bembry was 1st and Kevin Durant was 4th, then we'd be like, okay, Raptor's got a problem here, right? When Raptor lines up around pretty much what's happening with the rest of the team correctly, then I think we have to at that point say, well, if everything else kind of passes the eye test, or in this case, the statistical test, then at that point, then we kind of have to trust that Joe Harris has been a negative player this season. And maybe that's the case. Maybe just shooting 47% and not giving you much else, then it just becomes a problem. So this is to say, I believe that the Harris loss is still a loss. You would still rather have him on your team. Some of the stats are looking like it's closer to even than not. And it's just difficult to believe that to be true. And we'll see, right? So like over the course of a season, was some of this improved? Maybe, but it does lend a little bit of credence to the anti-Harris camp that would say, oh, literally anybody else going out in the court is better. Again, I don't believe that to be true, only to say that some other stats that are sitting out there would have it like that. So it's an interesting case with Harris. I'd be interested. Hey, hit us back about what you thoughts on this. If you want to leave a YouTube comment where you think, are you among the group that thinks that the team is better without Joe Harris? I'd like to hear it. I definitely know there's some people out there that believe that to be the case, or think they believe it to be the case. But yeah, there's just some stuff out there with Harris that has not looked good this season. And if you want to grind it down onto some statistical lines, then yeah, there's this. It doesn't look that good. I'm laughing because it feels nuts to say, but look, you trust some of these numbers as much as you can trust them. And in the off court stuff hasn't been great. If the Raptor stuff hasn't been great, if some of the pairings that you think would have worked, at least offensively, have not been amazing, and we know he's probably not good enough to make it up on the defensive end, then the Nets are an interesting spot. So we'll see. Time will tell. We'll have some more of this stuff bear out over as they get a longer sample size without him, which sometimes can help clarify some of how the stats are around that. It won't change Harris's stats at all, but we'll start to see what other combinations are either working or not working, because we're just going to get longer looks at them without Harris in the mix. So I want to touch on some of these other injuries that are cropping up around the NBA. Sort of seems to be a theme this season as we kind of break down that in all honesty, the Nets, compared to some of these teams, have been positively pillars of health when it comes to some of the injuries that other teams are dealing with or are now finding out that they are going to deal with as well. First, I'm going to talk to you about our friends over at Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered all this season. More props, odds, and lines than ever before. Football season marching toward the playoffs, obviously. NBA in full swing. Bet Online remains your number one spot for all the sports action you could ever dream of this season. Head on over to Bet Online's updated desktop mobile website. Sign up today and receive a 50% welcome bonus on that first deposit. You have to use the promo code Locked On, just like our podcast network, to receive your bonus. Basketball, football, NHL, boxing, UFC, even Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. Bet Online, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, so in terms of injuries this year, I guess if we're going to count Kyrie as an injury because they just hasn't played, then I take it back. The Nets have been as affected as any other team in basketball. Okay, so if you're going to count that as an injury, which I guess you have to, because if you're just going to count time lost, and I guess I am going to count a couple of these other teams of just time lost rather than injury. So I take back a bit of what I said a second ago around the Nets sort of being better than some of these teams, because I had dismissed the Kyrie piece as just kind of being a nothing or starting at zero without him. That's not correct. So if we're going to count that as a piece that was the expectation was going to get a lot of games out of him, then I take it back. So they've lost him. Obviously, Harris is going to be out, let's say 1 to 2 months now. Claxton, I'm going to throw him in there because he started the first game of the season. Nets were expecting a lot out of him this season. They've been basically without him the whole year. But this isn't the only team. Between COVID and regular injuries, like COVID still, timelines around players returning is still, like, we're not out of this with getting COVID and just being able to come back and play. Like, vaccinated or non-vaccinated, if you test positive for COVID, you are sitting out extended periods of time sometimes, right? Between whether it's just between getting back through the protocols or just getting sick. So other teams, if we go down this list, it's really every team has basically faced some kind of major issue already this season. Bulls were without Vooch forever on a team that was already super thin in the front court. They lost him for multiple games. Miami Heat just got dealt a terrible blow. Bam Adebayo is going to be out. He has a UCL tear, and he's going to miss extended time. That's a really pretty big loss for them. Not even all things considered. It's just a huge loss for them. Like Bam is a key piece of what they do. It's a right thumb injury. He's going to have surgery. He's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. Bad loss for the Heat, right? Okay, so you keep going. Wizards have actually been pretty healthy. Bucks played like half their first set of games without Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton, and Brook Lopez hasn't played in forever. So that team dealt with that was like the Giannis and the end of the bench show for absolutely forever. They're kind of starting to get healthier now, but they went through a huge stretch at the beginning of the season where they were just not healthy. Then we started to get to some of these other they're borderline playoff teams. The Knicks, and they kind of just dealt with their not a ton of injuries, but they're just dealing with some just roster stuff. Hornets been pretty healthy, all things considered, this season. Cleveland Cavaliers, they were without Mobley for a while. Jared Allen sat out some games. They lost Colin Sexton for the season. So like that's a team that's at points during the year have already sat out a bunch of their players. Sixers without Embiid for forever. He dealt with a bad case of COVID. He had said he had some like pretty startling things to say about how he was feeling during that process. So we just gone through more than half the teams in the East and showed that health at some point has been a major problem for like their core group. Hawks haven't been too bad on this. They've been pretty healthy. They just, I don't know, they're kind of running a little bad on their point differential. Celtics, Jaylen Brown has missed a lot of the season. Toronto Raptors have had guys like Siakam, took forever to get back on the court. OG's been out now for a while. That's a team that it hasn't exactly been super healthy. Barnes sat out a couple games. And then you go to the West, Suns, again, another season of just being like nobody gets hurt until today. Devin Booker is going to miss some time. He got hurt in Tuesday's game, and he is going to be out, I believe, an extended period of time now. I thought I had that right in front of me. I'll get that in a second. But he is definitely hurt. He's going to miss at least a couple games. We'll see what happens with him. That's a pretty bad loss for that team. That team had been so healthy all last year. It's one of the main reasons they won the championship. They just went into the finals came in second, did not win the championship. Came in second to the Bucks. It was mostly because they just refused to get hurt the entire season. Warriors been pretty healthy, but except they haven't had Klay Thompson, who they've been wanting to get back on the court. He has not played, totally integral part of their team. He's finally cleared to I think, begin basketball activities, so he should be back pretty soon. Jazz pretty healthy. Dallas, Porzingis looks like he's hurt again. Luke has been in and out of the lineup at times with injuries, has not played anywhere close to the full season. Grizzlies just lost John Morant. Clippers are going to be without Paul George. I'm not sure how long it's going to be, but he's not playing when I recorded this podcast. Lakers have been a mess with LeBron. LeBron had like the abdomen issue forever, and then finally came back and then tested positive for COVID, and he's going to miss a bunch of time. So he'll have missed at least half the Lakers season by the time he comes back. Keep going. Trailblazers, they just found out Damian Lillard is going to be out for an extended period of time. They're going to reevaluate him in 10 days. He's their best player. You can see where I'm kind of going with this. Like, this is crazy. Nuggets play without Jokic for a while. But then they also have not had Jamal Murray. They also just look like they're going to lose Michael Porter Jr. They are going to lose Michael Porter Jr. for the entire season. So I just went through more than half the teams and basically all the contenders and showed that comparatively, the Nets aren't dealing with anything worse than any other team this season. It's just been a season of injuries. Like, seems to be a theme. Guys are going to get injured. The more minutes you play, the easier it is to get injured. It's a pretty simple math problem, right? Like, that's just how it works. You get injured when you play for the most part. The more you play, the easier it's going to be to get injured. Superstars getting injured is not a new thing. We're just seeing this maybe lumping effect between, and COVID works into this. Like, COVID gets you sort of injured and not able to play in a way that we haven't seen before. You knock off the COVID minutes on losing the COVID minutes on some of these guys, maybe the numbers don't look that terrible in terms of teams like losing guys for extended period of time. But in that case, the Nets are just not different than a lot of these other squads. And it's good along these lines that they've been able to maintain a really good record. They're still first in the East. They are still a very good team. Point differential is third in the East right now. I think it's sixth overall. Sixth overall on the point differential. They're still a very good team. that's a good sign that you're not, the Sixers who are 11-10 right now, right? Like some of these, like the Lakers right now, who are 12-11 through and with a negative point differential after having lost LeBron, right? So like if you can weather some of the stuff that's happening to you and still have a good record, then you feel a little bit better about it. Obviously, some of these teams are about to go through maybe some spirals like the Blazers, right? So without Dame, who makes the engine cook. Like we saw what happens to the Nuggets when Jokic can't play. So the Nets aren't in that situation yet. They're still able to field two of their superstars, and that's two of the three superstars in the team, and that's a good thing. So just want to, along the Joe Harris injury line, want to just point out some of these other teams. And if you're not paying as close to the NBA attention to the NBA as we are on a daily basis, you can sometimes miss the forest for the trees when it comes to some of these injuries. So all teams deal with it. We'll see how the Nets do without Harris here for an extended period of time. Hopefully get Claxton back in the mix sooner than later. Kyrie, I don't know. Who knows with that? Doesn't look positive at this point, but times and things change. All right, we are going to be back again tomorrow. I'll preview the Timberwolves game that's coming up on Friday. Nice for the Nets to get sort of a couple days off. They do a back-to-back Friday and Saturday, Timberwolves, and then they play on Saturday again. In the meantime, make sure you head on over to the YouTube channel. The link will be in the show notes. Just crossed over the 500 sub mark. Looking to get to 1,000 now. Let's double it up. Let's do that 48 weeks we did with Harris. Let's do a little double up here. 500 to 1,000 over on YouTube. The link will be in the show notes. Thanks again for making Locked On Nets your first listen of the day. Free and available on all platforms. It's usually Adam that takes us out with a quote. I'm not as good at looking up quotes, super timely and funny quotes as him. So I'll just say thanks again for listening. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.